The second thing I wanted to look at, as far as deviance is concerned, in the chapter it talks about this issue of crime, and a certain kind of behavior is unlawful, would be considered a crime. So deviance can also, get to a point where people in society feel, threatened to the point where they have to do something about it, right? From a legal point of view. So how do we justify certain punishments? And there's a few, or I'm going to look at 4 different ways in which punishment is used as a way to control behavior and to set the sort of lines for what is considered criminal behavior. And every society has different justifications. So these 4 probably represent the main justifications that you'll find in any society. Okay, so the first one is known as retribution. Retribution is an act of moral vengeance which society inflicts on the offender, comparable to that caused by the offense. So here you'll often hear the phrase, an eye for an eye, or tooth for a tooth. And with retribution, what's happening here, justification, is a moral order, that things are out of balance. By committing certain crimes, you have upset the moral balance in society, and to right that moral balance, you have to have a punishment that's fitting to whatever you have done. So there is some retribution in the legal system in the U.S. It's not very common, but you'll hear judges say, this fits your crime. This punishment fits your crime. What you've done, will in some way balance the moral order. Okay, so that's retribution. The second justification that's used for punishment is deterrence. So the reason why we have punishment is to discourage future criminality. So it's any kind of punishment that will basically outweigh the pleasure of the crime. So when someone is about to do something, they'll think, oh, if I do this, the punishment will be, X, Y, and Z, and so now I won't do it. It deters them from wanting to commit that crime. And these can be pretty extreme. So I know in California, the drug the penalty for use of drugs or dealing drugs is quite severe, no matter what it is. It could be something very minimal, like an ounce of pot, can get you the same kind of punishment as robbing a bank, So, and in terms of how many times you've done it and things like that. So deterrence is somewhat effective in the sense that there's a rationality that goes on when someone's about to commit a crime. Is it really worth it? That's the question they're going to ask. Is it worth it? So if they know that if they go and steal, like, a pack of gum, they're gonna spend 10 years in jail, they're probably not going to do it, right? So deterrence is that kind of punishment where it really helps the potential criminal think twice about what they're going to do. All right, the third justification for punishment is rehabilitation. So this is any sort of program that's meant to reform an offender or a criminal into changing their ways. And rehabilitation was really important. It's a more modern form of punishment. It was important because it gave the possibility of someone who has committed a crime to re-enter society. So, space in jail is very limited, it's very expensive, so how can we reform the individual to come back into society and hopefully behave in a more appropriate and legal fashion? So rehabilitation reconforms the individual, teaches them the right way to act, the right way to think about things, and in that sense, hopefully prevent future offenses. So rehabilitation is not, in lockdown, you go to some program where you are taught certain things that hopefully will help you to be a better person than you were when you got into the program. Societal protection is when someone has committed a crime that's so offensive, so terrible that that person has to be put away or executed. So there are definitely offenses, and again, it depends on the society, that are just so horrible and so terrible that society believes that person cannot ever come back into society. So Charles Manson, who has murdered, many people, but then in very brutal ways that people think this man can never come back into society. So the justification is for the protection of society, that this person must be put away or executed so that they can never do that kind of harm again. So there is no rationale for reform or rehabilitation for that individual. They are so far, in what they have done is so terrible that any sort of rehabilitation would do nothing for that person. So currently there are 2 million people who are incarcerated, 4.7 million that are on parole and probation, which brings me to my last point, as far as a critical evaluation on punishment and on crime, that there's definitely a problem we're having right now in the criminal system with repeat offenders as far as the cost of providing various forms of punishment. So overcrowding in prisons, which can lead to reduced sentences, problems as far as security within the prison, and then the psychological impact of prison life, which basically has been proven to socialize criminal behavior rather than prevent them from committing future criminal acts. And then there's also a debate between capital punishment and rehabilitation versus life in prison. Which one is the best way? Which is the most humane way of approaching the problem of crime? What's the ethical thing to do? Do we end their life? Do we let them sit in prison for the rest of their life, or do we help them to come back into society? And of course, there are very strong opinions on on all three sides as to why one is better, one's worse. And then the last point of critical evaluation is overrepresentation of inmates. So what you'll find in prisons is mostly men, right? Minorities, and people who come from poor backgrounds, and people who typically have more conservative values. So how do we justify that? Our criminal justice system is not objective, that it does tend to prey on certain populations within society, and how can we correct for that? This is of course not fair. Everybody, there are plenty of rich people that commit crimes that do just as much harm, and how do we justify that they get away with it? Well, they have better lawyers, right? They have better representation in the justice system. So these things have to be looked at as a way to evaluate the criminal system. So what I want you to do for the lecture-based assignment 6B is to choose one type of punishment that you think is the best alternative, and I want you to explain why you think that is. And then choose one type of punishment that you think is the worst alternative, and then explain why you think that, and then turn that into etudes. Okay, and I will see you next time.